Hey guys, back. So now let's talk about viral pneumonia. They usually occur as a complication of influenza, measles, chickenpox, or, as you all know, come from the wilderness, zoonosis. Okay, so that's what mostly we're going to talk about today in this video. So we had SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome associated coronavirus. So the SARS-CoV, the initial one, was found in an emerging epidemic in Asia in 2003. Okay, and then in 2012 we had MERS-CoV. That is also a coronavirus from the Middle East, so it's Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. So that was reported in Saudi Arabia. These two epidemics were controlled in time. And then, I don't know if you heard about this, but SARS-CoV-2 is what we're facing nowadays. If you're watching this video in 2021, this is where we are, right? In the middle of a pandemic, trying to get as many people as possible vaccinated to get out of it. We're not going to get out of it unless we have herd immunity. So in China in 2019, SARS-CoV-2 was detected, and it was defined as a virus that causes COVID, coronavirus disease 19 for the year 2019. It affects elderly individuals, but also younger individuals. We know that now. The virus survives on surface for a long period, but those don't seem to be the ones that cause the transmission. The transmission rate is 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 people, and it is prevented by mask, I forgot to write here, mask, and social distancing. Initial symptoms are fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And now we're going to talk about more details about COVID. So this is the only disease actually that you're going to learn that is not in your book. So COVID, things that I didn't tell you. There are 3 stages, right? So the stages are first asymptomatic, between 1 and 2 days of the infection, where individuals are very contagious. They can spread the disease to others. And you can detect it by nasal swab by performing PCR. Stage 2, upper airway and conducting airway response in the next days after day 1 and 2, right? Stage 3, hypoxia and ground glass infiltrates and progression to ARDS. This is the critical stage, right? So let's talk about this. Why do you have hypoxia? Because you are progressing to ARDS. What is ARDS? ARDS is acute respiratory distress syndrome. What happens in ARDS? If you look at one alveolus, that's it, right? Inside the alveolus, you see this yellow thing here in the drawing, that's fluid accumulating. So you start to accumulate fluid in the alveoli, and the virus is infecting type 2 cells, which are cells that coat the alveolus. If you look here, one alveolar space, you have this macrophage here and other cells that line the epithelium, and the virus can get in the epithelial cells and in the macrophages of the respiratory system, okay? You also have macrophages in the interstitial space and fibroblasts and other cells from the blood that surround these alveolus through the capillaries. So these can help in the defense, okay? That's why not everybody gets very sick, because you have a lot of immune system around your lungs to try to attack it. The ground glass infiltrate is what is shown here. So these whitish regions here and all these white little, threads that you see in this X-ray are what is called bilateral, peripheral, and subpleural opacities. So you see this mostly in the lower lobes of the lung. So in that initial phase that we talked about, that is asymptomatic, the virus is inhaled, it is binding to the epithelial cells in the nasal cavity, and it starts the replication. How do they get in the cell? They get in the cell because they attach to the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is a receptor on cells that we're going to talk about that in a minute, so we talk about their function. Okay? The second stage is when the virus is propagating and migrating down the respiratory tract, okay, along the conducting airways, and then you have a more robust immune response to them that can be able to resolve the infection or not, right? About 20% of the people that go through stage 2 can get to stage 3. And in this case, when they progress to the stage 3, you already have the development of these pulmonary infiltrates, which are characteristic of ARDS, okay? So they start to affect the gas exchange between blood and alveoli, okay? So that's the most critical thing when you think about COVID. The high mortality rate of COVID is associated with effects that are related to renal failure, respiratory and circulatory failure. And so now let's talk about more details so we can go over what's going on here. So this is the pathogenesis of COVID, right? So the SARS-CoV-2 virus is able, through its spikes, to bind to the ACE2 receptor, okay? The ACE2 receptor is here, the viral spike is this, and then by binding to ACE2, this virus is able to get internalized into the host cells, which are these type 2 epithelial cells in the alveoli. As they get internalized, you make these receptors dysfunctional because they downregulate the ACE2, okay? And then, what does ACE2 does? It's a molecule able to convert angiotensin 1 in angiotensin 2, because it converts angiotensin 1 into A1-9 and then A2 in A17. So all these two conversions, this through this and this through this, is what makes angiotensin effective. As what? As a molecule that promotes vasodilation, okay? So as the disease progresses to the next stage, it's important also to remember ACE2 also helps to inhibit fibrosis. So when this is downregulated, you have an increasing fibrosis in the lung tissue, okay? So that's one problem that also you see, where when you look at the CT, the scans from the lung, and you see those clots that form, that's fibrosis. And one of the things that is happening is ACE2 is downregulated, okay? So it's not performing that function of avoiding it. So there is endothelial inflammation, and the virus is also able to bind to the damaged endothelial cells and promote apoptosis of these cells. So you start to have thrombus forming because the endothelial cells are damaged, and then you see here, that's a thrombus. And those are the immune cells coming around the thrombus to try to control it, right? So inflammation can lead to thrombosis, okay? So you hear about thrombosis in COVID, right? And it can be just in the lungs or in different organs, because that thrombus can detach and move to another part of the body too. And also, other than this decreasing fibrinolysis or ability to break down clots and increasing thrombin production, which induces thrombus, you start to have a dysregulated immune response. So you don't have so many responsive T cells, but they start to have a hyperimmune reaction, which is what we call the cytokine storm, right? With all this, you can see what's happening and what kind of symptoms this pathogenesis can promote, right? So when you look at the many variable symptoms that you can have with COVID, neurological symptoms, renal symptoms, hepatic symptoms, and you can see the detailed ones here. So in the neurologic, look at this, anosmia, you cannot smell, right? Dizziness, headache, and then you lose the sense of taste and the sense of smell, right? The gastrointestinal complications, the dermatology complication, endocrine complications, cardiac, thromboembolism. So all this can happen as a consequence of COVID, which are extrapulmonary symptoms, right? Okay, so let's talk about the vaccines. We have 4 important vaccines being produced. Actually, nowadays I think we have even more. This table may be a little slightly older, but in the US we're using the Pfizer BioNTech and the Moderna. These vaccines are all used in 2 doses, 90 to 95% effective. Okay, and then it shows you the storage here. So the ones we're using are either -70 degrees or -20 degrees. The mRNA, which is what the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are made of, have different doses. See, so the Pfizer is a lot smaller dose than the Moderna. Maybe that's what makes the Moderna be able to be kept at -20 instead of -70, because they put an excess of RNA, right? And what is that RNA? It's the mRNA for the COVID-19 viral spike. So the only thing that your cell that captures, your muscle cell that captures that virus is going to do, the muscle cell that captures the mRNA is going to do is translate that little spike. You're not being inoculated with the virus, only with the RNA that makes the spike. So all your immune cell, your muscle cell is going to do is a spike. And your immune cell is going to recognize that spike and produce a memory immune response against it. So if in the future you get infected with the SARS-CoV-2, your immune cells, your memory cells quickly can eliminate the virus before you get sick. That's why the vaccine is effective. So there is a respiratory syncytial virus, which is a very common virus, and it affects almost all children by the age of 2. So it's usually infants. And most of the cases are either asymptomatic or mild symptoms. The symptoms are very clear, which is coughing and wheezing. You hear the kid breathing and you have that little wheeze in the back as they breathe, okay? You usually can treat this with just giving some bronchodilators, and you wait until the disease is done, is over, where the course of the disease is finished. This is diagnosed usually by serological test, and the treatment with antivirus just in very severe cases. Only 1% of the cases get to be serious and complicated, okay? Older adults, especially those over 65 years old, can also get RSV, and also adults with the weakened respiratory system or immune system, actually both. Each year you have around 177,000 older adults hospitalized, and 14,000 of them die in the US due to RSV. So it's really big in older adults. In children, it can affect upper or lower respiratory tract, and like I said, only 1% of the kids really get very badly committed with this disease. Flu, influenza virus. there are 8 RNA segments and an outer lipid envelope in this virus. There are 2 very important spikes. One that helps the virus attach to the host, which is the hemagglutinin spike or HA spike, and the one that helps the virus exit the host cell, which is the neuraminidase or NA spike. These spikes are very antigenic. They're recognized by the immune system, and they cause what's called antigenic drift when you have minor changes in HA or NA spikes that allows for the virus to elude the immune system and evade it. Okay? The antigenic shifts is when these changes are much more wild, and in that case you have situations where the virus is not covered by vaccines that you previously had, or the immune system of most of the individuals cannot recognize it, and that's what leads to pandemics. So one thing that happens in the case of pandemics is that you have what's called reassortment of the viral genetic material. So for example, a mixing vessel, which in the case is the pig, is the pig gets infected with the human flu and with the avian flu. And then this virus starts to change genetic material between them, creating a new variant, right? So that is an antigenic drift, okay? So when we talk about H1N1, that was created by reassortment, okay? So that's why it's called the avian, because it came from the avian flu, but with the mix with our flu that our body knew, this new variant was still able to come back and infect us. So there was a pandemic in 1918. That was a very, very bad pandemic, and it is estimated that about 500 million people and 1/3 of the world population became infected with this virus in 1918. And the number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with about 675,000 occurring in the United States. Think about it, 675,000 deaths. By now, we are in March 2021. We have 400 and something thousand deaths from COVID, compared to 675,000. This is what happened during the pandemic of flu in 1980. So we're still below what we saw in that pandemic, okay, when it compares to deaths. And then there was another pandemic in 1968 caused by H3N2. And then in 2019, we had another pandemic caused by H1N1. So it was another reassortment that caused this new variant to circulate. 1/3 of the people over 60-year-old had antibody against the virus. So this was good because the exposure to the older H1N1 was enough to protect a lot of people, but you still had a pandemic, okay? Vaccine. If you take, see the CDC recommends, if you take any of the age-appropriate vaccines, which include inactivated, recombinant, or live attenuated vaccine, you get immune. So it's ideal that everybody takes this vaccine yearly, because they're not long lasting and because the variants change, right? You have new mutations for the flu. So, and you may say, well, I never get the flu, so that's why I don't take it, because I keep not taking it and I still never get it. But remember, you may be a carrier of the virus even though you're not producing symptoms, and you may be infecting other people without knowing. So when we take vaccines, we're taking not just for us, we're taking to protect the elderly people, the infants, people with other secondary conditions that are very prone to infections. So these are the people that we are thinking about, not just ourselves, okay? So these vaccines are all multivalent, so they include basically more than 100 different tested flu variants in the world, and based on that is what they make the vaccine. Okay. Flu has a 1% mortality rate, which is not to be neglected. So it's very important that everybody gets protection against it. Okay guys, next video I'll talk to you about the fungal diseases. Bye bye.